Well, like I said, there's lots of information in the bulletin about, Thanksgiving and that event, the puzzles, praise and pie event coming up, and even some Christmas information in there. I know some of you are really excited about Christmas already. I sort of work from the philosophy that for every Christmas ornament that's put up before Thanksgiving, elf kills a reindeer. It's a bad thing. You don't want to be involved in that. And so I'm excited. I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving. Let's not rush past Thanksgiving. And I suppose when I think about Thanksgiving, I know it's hard from looking at me, but what do you suppose I'm thinking? That Thanksgiving feast, right? Excited about that. And I wrote a little article about the first Thanksgiving this week, and maybe you read that newsletter, and maybe not, but I was thinking about that and just thinking about how that feast has been reshaped through the years. There's many traditional items that maybe even were shared on that very first Thanksgiving, like cranberries. Cranberries are native to kind of that area on the East Coast, and so people think there were probably some cranberries shared there. Now, there wasn't any sauce, there wasn't any sugar wasn't grown there, and so they didn't have access to that at that time probably, but so over the years, the first time that cranberry sauce recipe shows up in an American cookbook is in 1796, and if your favorite way to enjoy cranberry sauce is in a can shape, that happened a little later. Our dishes, our traditional Thanksgiving dishes have been reshaped over time. Or what about pumpkin pie? There was probably some kind of pumpkin dishes, perhaps, that were a part of that first Thanksgiving celebration. And by the 1800s, pumpkin pie had become a staple of that celebration. In 1869, one author said that pumpkin pie was an inevitable part of the Thanksgiving holiday. Sometime later, though, if you're a little bit like me and pumpkin pie is really just something to hold the Cool Whip, right? We just need something to balance that stuff on. Then that came along. It was reshaped sometime after that. If your favorite side dish at Thanksgiving, the most popular side dish in the Midwest, according to them, is the green bean casserole. That didn't happen until 1955 when Campbell's discovered we need some way to sell this cream of mushroom soup. Nobody is buying this for anything else. So along came the green bean casserole, or maybe you just have this love of sweet potatoes, and probably maybe at that first Thanksgiving, sweet potatoes were there, but it wasn't until 1917 when marshmallows started to be mass produced that they started to appear on the top of our sweet potatoes at Thanksgiving. Over time, these classic, traditional holiday dishes have been reshaped. I know, maybe you're a little stressed about Thanksgiving dinner and you're not sure how you're going to pull it off this year. I wanted to help. I was at the store the other day and I found a couple of items that can help like this. 2 cups of noodles. The first one is turkey dinner flavored. All right, and so you got turkey dinner and a cup of noodle, and the second one is pumpkin pie flavored cup of noodle. Just an opportunity to reshape your holiday feast this year. And I don't know how much we need to reshape the food we eat, but there are certainly other areas of our life that needs reshaped. And as we get to James chapter 5, the first 6 verses, he offers these warnings to the rich, and it just reminds me how much that our view of wealth, the resources that God has provided for us, needs to be reshaped. In James chapter 5, the first 6 verses, James offers these warnings to the rich and just acknowledges you better heed these warnings to reshape your view of wealth. If you're here for the very first time and you said, you were talking to somebody, hey, I'm going to try church this Sunday, but that guy better not talk about money. I mean, buckle up, I'm sorry, We tend to preach through books of the Bible here at Wallula Christian Church, and so when it's in the book, then we kind of have to deal with it a little bit, and so Not always are we talking about money by any means here at Wallula, but we're going to do it a little bit this morning. Reshape our view of wealth. Here in James chapter 5, the first 6 verses, this is what God's word says. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Man, heavy verses, not a lot of fun here as we begin to consider these 3 warnings. Warning number 1 is misplaced treasure. In verse 1 here in chapter 5 begins simply, come now you rich. And I suppose as we get to those first few words here in verse 1, and really anytime when we read about the rich in Scripture, we have to ask ourselves, who's that? Who is James talking to here? And certainly, if you remember a few months ago, as we started our study, way back at the beginning of the year, we started our study of James and continued a few months ago, that this is the first time that he's addressed the wealthy in this letter. And chapter 1, he talks about the rich, and he just reminds us way back in chapter 1 that your view of wealth really needs to be reshaped, because he warned that just like the grass withers and the flowers fall, that wealth is wasting away, that nothing lasts forever, but our relationships, and especially our relationship with God through Jesus, that His Word is the only thing that lasts. Everything else is wasting away. In chapter 2, James continues a conversation with the rich when he warns the church there, hey, God doesn't show any partiality. God doesn't play favorites, and so you ought not play favorites. And especially, he uses the example, if a rich guy comes in, and you can't save the best seats, and in that day, in the first century, that would have been the very front row seats here. We don't do that here. The first 2 rows are empty, right? We have taken James' warning seriously. Right, for us, kind of the cream of the crop seats are in the back, or maybe those end of the aisle seats. We love those, the whole scooching over. We want a quick escape here at Wallula Christian Church. And so, James says, whatever the cream of the crop seats are, you don't save those for somebody who comes in looking a little extra nice, for that wealthy guy, especially when you make the poor guy stand up and back. Don't play favorites. Goes on in chapter 2 to say, it's crazy that you're playing favorites with that rich guy on Sunday morning, because isn't he the one who is oppressing you? The first century church was overwhelmingly filled with poor folks. They didn't have a lot to share. It's why when you read Acts chapter 2 and the early church shared everything they had, it's really amazing, because they didn't have all that much. And James says, isn't it the rich who are oppressing you? And we kind of get to the conclusion of that conversation here in chapter 5 as we pick this back up. And we have to ask, probably James has in mind, because there weren't too many rich people in the early church, too many believers, he probably has non-believers in mind. But maybe there were some rich folks involved in that kind of hoarding of wealth and oppressing of others, even in the church. I just think if we're going to listen and think about how we apply these principles in our world today, don't we need to consider that when James says, come now you rich, don't we need to think, is he talking to me? Is he talking to us? And you're probably not much different from me in this way. In lots of ways, hopefully you are, but not, in this way, probably not. When somebody asks you, do you consider yourself to be wealthy? Your response is, well, no. Right? No, somebody who makes a little more than me, he's the rich guy. You know, I heard one author say, he was a professor in college, and he asked his students, do you think you come from a rich family? And the student said, well, no, I grew up in a 2-story house. The rich people live in 3-story houses. Right? I've got a 2-car garage. The rich people have a 3 or a 4-car garage. You know, that's what a big, wealthy home looks like. We always think that somebody with a few more dollars than we have, well, those are the rich folks. But when you consider that 52%, that's more than half. It's preacher math, I know, but I think that's more than half. 52% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. $10 a day, 52% of the world on less than $10 a day. Pretty much, look, we're not supposed to keep score like this, and we're not trying to, but I'm just going to guess that means every single person in this room falls into sort of the super wealthy in this world. Probably every one of us is living on a little more than $10 a day. I just think we have to consider, when James says, "Come now, you rich," who's he talking to? And is it us? Because the warning that comes, this warning number 1, this misplaced treasure, he uses some language right away. "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." This weeping and howling is Old Testament prophecy language, and sometimes we think, well, those Old Testament prophets were always talking about something in the future, but mostly those Old Testament prophets were saying, you guys better cut it out. They used words like weeping and howling because they're repentance language. You need to change direction. Stop being so selfish. Start chasing after God. Start listening to Him and obeying Him. And so James reaches back for some of that Old Testament prophet language and says, you guys better repent. You had better change direction because miseries, God's judgment is on its way. And I just think misery speaks for itself. I don't feel like I need to illustrate it. There's not good days ahead. When Jesus returns, that's sort of what's in sight here. Man, there's some judgment coming your way. All because of the way you've handled these resources, this wealth, this attitude you have towards the wealth, the riches that God has given you. You better reshape that. James is warning them. You can't misplace your treasure. He goes on in verse 2 to say, your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. That's misery, right? You have laid up treasure in the last days. Some scholars say that James is a lot like the Old Testament book of Proverbs. I like the comparison much better. When you kind of map out and outline the book of James, you can see the parallels to the Sermon on the Mount and to Jesus' teaching so clearly. And it's for sure that James is reaching back to that Sermon on the Mountain, to Jesus' teaching. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21, Jesus said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. These things that in the ancient world especially were signs of wealth, the clothes that they wore. If you had an extra set of clothes, you were sort of among the super wealthy in the first century. And man, you're saving that. Why? Because the moths are going to get it. It is wasting away. When Jesus said, do not lay up for yourselves, the Greek there, he's really saying, stop it. Stop laying up. You go back to James chapter 5, and James is in the past tense, isn't he? Look, this is already going on. You've already stored this stuff up. And why? Because it's all going to waste away. He talks about these precious metals. And I'm no expert here, but I don't think those precious metals really rust and decay. And so what's James saying? He's saying, man, this is of no value on Judgment Day. That even when you come in with the purest of pure gold rings, it's not going to make a difference. That's not what's truly important here. It's all wasting away, so stop storing it up. We're just might be misplacing our treasure. There's an epidemic of storage in the United States. I'm as guilty as anyone. We've got this garage floor at our house. It's starting to crack and chip, and we need to get it repaired. And so, we're in the process of having that done. And Sherry scheduled a date, and she said, this is the date the guy's going to come and fix the garage floor. And I said, okay, but that's coming up really fast, and we got to get all that stuff off the garage floor. And there's more out there, I said to Sherry, than you think. There's an epidemic of storage in the United States. Did you know that the storage industry is a $39 billion industry? That there are over 49,000 storage facilities in the United States? That those storage facilities are 98% occupied? That 65% of those renters in those storage facilities have garages at home? We're packing it away. It's very likely that some of us especially need to hear these words. Consider what you're storing away. Consider what you're kind of hoarding in the closet, because it's not going to be of any value when we see Jesus face to face. We need to live with that open hand and a hand of generosity. And over the years, Wallula has been such a generous church. And God is doing amazing things through the resources that you are sharing. I've just recently had the chance to hear some stories from Brothers in Blue, one of the missions that we support, and hear about the lives that are transformed in that ministry. Folks who have chased after their selfish desires, who are incarcerated for those choices, and who meet Jesus and their lives change direction so that when they get out, right, when they re-enter culture, society, their lives are transformed and they're chasing after Jesus. We've heard some of you were just at this Honduras Ministries fundraiser, and we've heard stories from this past summer and the mission trip there, just the amazing changes in the lives of families, because we're sharing some resources to buy beans and rice for these families so kids don't have to go to work in fields, but they can go to school, and that education transforms their life. By the way, we're introducing them to Jesus and the churches that are facilitating all of that food ministry, and lives are transformed forever and ever and ever because of that. Just this last Sunday night at this worship and prayer night at Westside, I heard from one of our ministry team leaders here at Wallula Christian Church, Jason Alvis. He leads their missions team. He leads this ministry called Rehope, just reaching in and helping folks get out of this sex trafficking and that whole world, and he's telling a story about a young lady that they helped through a series of just interrelated events escape that, and she moves to Germany, and somebody asks him, because he's retired military, do you know anybody in Germany? And there's just this kind of 7 degrees of separation that eventually these relationships are collected and interlocked, and they meet that young lady in Germany, and she's introduced to Jesus, and now her life is transformed, yes, because her physical safety has been secured. But man, how much more important is it that her spiritual safety is secured as well? That her life is transformed because she's introduced to Jesus. 2 more baptisms this morning here at Wallula Christian Church at the 9 o'clock worship service. 2 more lives transformed as they meet and say yes to Jesus. That's 24 baptisms in this year, which, man, we need to work harder. It needs to be more, but that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Every time I see one of these folks lowered under that water and raised back up, I think about the Apostle Paul and his transition from Saul to Paul, and who knows, the next Billy Graham, who knows? The next transformation that's occurring right before us. Who knows the difference that they will make? Who knows the difference they'll make at Leavenworth High School or in their small group or at their place of work or what? God is working and doing some amazing things. This transformation is real. I keep using that word, and I know it's a big word, but that's what He is about. That's why we're about it here at Wallula Christian Church. We want to transform and equip believers to make a bigger difference in their lives outside of these four walls. Man, He's doing some big things. And it begins for all kinds of reasons, right? It doesn't for sure come down to dollars and cents. For all kinds of reasons, God is doing some big things. But a part of that is the generosity that helps to fuel that mission. Right? We just need to be careful about how we can sometimes misplace our treasure. Warning number 2 is to misplace our security. Look at verses 4 and 5 here. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you have kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in the days of slaughter. It just gets tougher and tougher here. For these rich folks in James chapter 5. And this warning of misplaced security, they're hoarding these resources. Verse 4, behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud and crying out against you, and the cries of harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. These are literal day laborers who evidently have had their wages stolen by those who have hired them. They've hired them to work for the day, and they just never paid them. We use the phrase, living paycheck to paycheck, and some of us have been in this spot, maybe are in this spot, and you just kind of understand that struggle and how hard that can be sometimes. You sort of multiply that situation to the hundredth or thousandth percent, and that's what you get with these day laborers. Very literally, if they were not paid on that day, they could not eat that day. They couldn't sustain themselves with food and shelter. And so when you get to the end of these 6 verses, and James is talking about you murdered these people, I think that is metaphor mostly, but sort of reality. Because as you withheld these wages, they couldn't eat. They had no place to lay their head. They couldn't sustain themselves physically. I think there's a couple important things here as we think about folks that are maybe in a situation kind of like that, who are experiencing that kind of hurt and struggle financially or whatever, and just are curious about, where's that next meal coming from, or am I going to make rent at the end of the month, and just know a couple of things. First of all, that your cries are reaching Jesus, that He knows, that He hears your predicament, right? That's the promise that James made to these rich people. Those cries, those folks that you are hurting, they've reached heaven. God knows about it. And secondly, that God is big enough to do something about it. Eventually, He promises that, hey, there will be no more tears and there'll be no more crying because we will be in His presence forever. But this phrase, Lord of hosts, last week we talked about spiritual warfare and kind of these unseen forces that are all around us. And here the Lord of hosts, that phrase means that there is somebody who is in charge, somebody who has more authority, more power than all of that unseen realm that we can't see, and that somebody is Jesus. That He's absolutely Lord of this world, that He's Lord of those heavenly realms, that He is big enough to handle it. Goes on in talking about these rich folks. In verse 5, he says, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter. That language there, the metaphor there is like fattening a calf to butcher. You're just hoarding this wealth. And why? Because judgment is coming, and it won't matter. It won't matter. You've enjoyed your life on this earth right now. It's like the story that Jesus tells about the rich man and Lazarus. Lots of people say this is a parable. I'm unsure if this is a parable or an actual story that Jesus is telling, but in any event, the principles are the same. He tells a story about a rich man who every day he walks into his house and into work, and in both ways he crosses over this beggar on the street named Lazarus. Both of them die. Lazarus goes to heaven. The rich man goes to hell. The rich man is experiencing those miseries that James is talking about. And he asks Jesus, just send Lazarus down, with a spoonful of water, that I have a little bit of relief for just 1 second. God said, can't do it. The divide's too great. He said, you experienced your safety and security on earth, and you ignored others in that process. These are the consequences. The rich man said, well, then send an angel to talk to my brothers and to warn my brothers. And again, God said, look, the warning's there in the prophets. They won't believe it anyway. They've had warning enough, and I think James is in that spot here. Folks, you've had warning enough. Better consider how we're living in luxury and self-indulgence. We've got this garage floor. Let me tell you the whole story, okay? This is what happened. So this garage floor is deteriorating. One day this last summer, I said, Sherry, I've got to clean out this garage, and I've got to fix some of the spots in this floor, and then we need to reseal it. I got to reseal this. And Sherry's hearing that I'm thinking about doing this, and she's got no confidence in me whatsoever. And so she starts looking for somebody else. We better find somebody who can do this, And so she's hiring this out, and she said, Lance, do you want to hire this guy to do this? And he's going to fix the floor, and then he's going to put this epoxy paint, this fancy paint. What style of paint, what design do you want on this? And I said, well, Sherry, I don't think we're epoxy paint people, right? I just don't, I don't know. And I was talking to my small group, and my small group said, oh, no, you're going to love this. You'll be able to walk barefoot on it. And I think I'm preaching James chapter 5, the first 6 verses, and I think maybe I ought to have a little stubble on my bare feet. I'm feeling guilty about this epoxy painted floor. And I'm kind of joking about that, except not really. I mean, we had better make sure, look, the message here is not don't care for your home, don't plan for the future. The message here isn't any of those things. We have to do those things too. But it's that we need to make sure that we're not hoarding this stuff. That we're living a lifestyle that allows us to share what God has given us with those around us. It really brings us to this warning number 3. We can't misplace our security. Warning number 2. Warning number 3 is misplaced judgment. Verse 6 says, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. The righteous, the poor were often referred to from the Old Testament to the New Testament as righteous. Right? And so we're talking about the mistreatment of the rich on the poor here. And again, I think in a very real way, they were experiencing some physical consequences. You withheld these wages every day, and they couldn't eat. They had no way to take care of themselves. And so in some ways, this is a physical murder. In other ways, it's a metaphor, like you cannot treat people like this. You had better figure out how you can help those around us. And I'm just reminded, especially right now, that there are plenty of people in need around us. We're just hearing so much about government shutdown and government benefits, and all that conversation is going on in the news. And I did a little research. There's 21,000 people in Leavenworth County and Wyandotte County that receive SNAP benefits. All right, now I think I just read that those benefits were deposited or whatever, and the state of Kansas figured that out, and I hope so, and that's good. But just know that there's plenty of that insecurity all around us all the time, that we want to be busy and helping those in need. And it's why we do things like this third Thursday meal, where every third Thursday of the month we're going to feed hundreds of people that otherwise might not know where that next meal is coming from. We want to be serious about that now more than ever. ever. Our service at the Interfaith Shelter of Hope, that's so important. This is the first really cold day of the year. I mean, think about if you were sleeping outside tonight, that wouldn't be any fun. And Mondays and Tuesdays we serve to help shelter folks, provide a safe place to sleep and in a warm place to sleep in the winter. All those things are so important. We need to continue to do that. Just had a meeting last Saturday with all this talk going on with some different churches and organizations. How can we meet this need right now? And they got together and it's like, how can we help? And just let us know. And Friday I get this email that there's going to be a food drive. This is last minute, I know it. And I'm not sure how we're going to serve best during this food drive, but on November 15th at the Council of Aging, you can drop off food. You can just take it there if you want and drop it off there. But we'll send out a list and how you can contribute, and you can drop it off here this week, and we'll get it there. And even if you bring it next Sunday, we'll get it to the right places. You know, it'll be a few days late. It'll be okay. And we need to keep serving and sharing the best we can all around us. And so that's one more way that we can do that. I know that there are folks in this room that are dealing with this government shutdown and their job's been furloughed and all of those things. And I don't know what I don't know. I just want you, I said this week in this newsletter, if any of you read that, hey, we want to be a church that reflects the New Testament. And when I talk about the New Testament church, the early church, that's Acts chapter 2 kind of church. Acts chapter 2, this church filled with mostly poor people was described as sharing everything they had so that others around them who were in need had those needs met. I just want you to know that we want to be that kind of church here at Wallula Christian Church. And I don't know your situation. I'm American enough to know it's none of my business, right? But just as your preacher, as your brother in Christ, can you just let me stick my nose in your business a little bit? And so if you're dealing with that right now, I would just love for you to write shut down, that word shut down, on your welcome home card. And I want to, first of all, I will pray for you this week. I just want to be praying for you. But no, I'm going to reach out to you and ask, is there other ways that Wallula Christian Church can help meet any need that's there? I don't have any idea, right? I'm not trying to get in your business, but we want to be a church that just meets the needs of those in our body. How will they know that you are followers? Jesus answered, well, they'll know it by your love, right? By the way you love one another. We tend to think of those one another's as somebody out there. Those one another's are that person next to you in this room. That one another's are other followers of Jesus. And so just know, we want to help, right? Shut down on that welcome home card. Just allow. Don't keep those folks around. You can kind of give them a side eye. Don't look at them right now, but give them a side eye. Don't let those people sitting around you, don't keep them from having the opportunity to serve and minister to you, and just do what Jesus asked them to do. So just write that shut down on that card. We want to help however we can. If nothing else, we just want to pray for you, and that's bigger. I shouldn't say if nothing else. That's bigger than anything else we can do. Right, but we want to be there for you. There's all kinds of ways coming up. That there's information in your bulletin. Just around the corner will be all this Christmas stuff we do: the walk to the manger offering, the red mitten gifts, and the angel tree gifts. All kinds of ways that we can serve. I don't want to overwhelm you with those. Just know that we want to be a people who are living with an open hand, who have reshaped our view of wealth and resources. It's not the money or the wealth or the resources that is evil. It's our attitude when we selfishly keep it to ourselves only. I mean, that's the problem. And that's why it's so dangerous. Because it's pretty easy for us to do that. If we're honest, we had better always be reshaping our view of wealth. It can be done. Thinking about reshaping food. My daughter Zoe, she's 21 years old. She served at this Christian camp this summer, and I maybe mentioned this before. She was coming home. Sherry and her mom went to pick her up, and she's coming home, and she sent a text message to me. She said, "Dad, when we get home, can we have hamburgers for supper?" And I said, "Well, for sure, but you don't eat hamburgers." And she said, "No, I do now." I eat hamburgers now. And she's 21. I said, sure, we can do that. But my mind raced back to when she was like 3 years old, and we're sitting at the dinner table, and it's like, Zoe, you have to eat something. You know, if you don't eat anything, they will arrest me. This is mostly selfish. You know, eat something. And there's this pile of green beans on her plate, and she said, there's no way I'm eating those green beans. And you know, I'm this young dad, I think I got to be dad. You are going to eat those green beans. And she is just not eating them. And as the negotiation wears on, it gets to eat a couple bites of those green beans. No chance I'm eating those green beans. It gets down to Zoe, just eat one green bean. I've got a life I want to live. Eat a green bean. She's like, no, I'm not eating any green beans. I don't know how we reconciled that or resolved that. I do know we didn't sleep at that dinner table, and that she didn't eat a green bean. But the hamburger situation holds out hope for me. That someday she will give in and eat the least objectionable of all the green vegetables, right? That's the green bean. You know, we put bacon and butter on those things. Just eat a green bean. I'm holding out hope that her vision of food can be reshaped. Man, if that can be true, then the way we view wealth can be reshaped too. We can live with an open hand. We can be generous. We can continue to do that, and we can do that even better. Let's stand and worship Him today.